Welcome back to episode 5 of the From the Spot podcast. This week, I'm joined by Luke and Robbie, and we're going to be talking about some of the biggest sporting stories of this week. And I think we'll start off with Chelsea, who have had yet another defeat, this time against Tottenham, maybe a bit more embarrassing than some of the others. What do you make of that? And more specifically, what do you make of Graham Potter's reaction to that, where he started to slag off other managers and say, you know, actually, they were doing worse than I was at this stage in their career?
We kind of covered this a couple of weeks ago when I was last on the podcast, saying that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and especially after such a let's say positive January transfer window, that we're now kind of focusing on the results need to improve, and it's just kind of gone downhill. It's gone backwards. There was a slight upturn in performance, I would say, against Dortmund, and then we end up losing to Southampton, a managerless Southampton, and it's a very kind of ridiculous situation now to be looking at it and pointing fingers at other coaches that have been in previous scenarios, but with very different kind of environments surrounding the situations. I mean, to look at kind of Klopp or Arteta's situation, yes, they've struggled. Yes, there's been periods where they kind of weren't achieving as they should have been, but they haven't spent the ludicrous sums of money that we've had spent in the transfer window while they've been there, and they also haven't had any issues with a fan base not understanding that there's going to take time. Yes, Arteta slightly, there's a lot of outrage from Arsenal, I think, but that's because it's inherited a lot from Unai Emery and the fallout from there, and a lot of they hadn't been competing for many years. Whereas for Liverpool, I think it was very clear. Klopp came in, he was trying every week to implement this style, and he'd had success at other clubs. Potter, his success, his highest finish with Brighton was he was pushing to get to the top 4 with Brighton just at the point when we signed him. So we brought him over, and it's a lot to sort of take, and it's a very, very kind of negative environment around the club, around the ground at the moment, and we really have to kind of either group together and decide, are we going to see it out for the remainder of the season? Because I don't know what a new manager is going to do right now, and I don't know if it's a good time to be getting a new manager now. However, there is the really kind of troublesome prospect that if our form doesn't upturn, we could get pulled into this relegation kind of battle. We're level on points with Aston Villa, and they had a ridiculously bad start to the season under Gerrard. There's no saying that we, just because we're Chelsea and because of the money we've spent, we should be okay. But if we carry on not winning games, then everyone else will catch up to us. I mean, it really could become a serious problem. If it comes to the end of March and we still haven't picked up any points, then we're really, really in a serious predicament of saying, yes, we want to back the man, give him time, thin out the squad, give him everything he needs to succeed. But we still have to kind of make sure that we focus on the main objective and stay in the Premier League, which is a ludicrous thing to be saying when you look at the summer window we had off the back of 2022 summer window, to see what the squad that Tuchel had at the time. And to think now we're talking about just making sure we get 40 points and stay in the league is kind of crazy.
I suppose some of his recent interviews and everything as well are showing similarities to some of Nathan Jones's last ones at Southampton, portioning the blame onto everyone else. There's too many people around the training ground, or, look at where they were. They weren't doing brilliantly a year into their career. Now they're up at the top of the table. Do you think maybe his interviews are just as worrying as the on-pitch performances now?
I think there's still a pinch of salt to be taken with that. It's always difficult. Like any manager that comes into a top 4 kind of club, top 6 kind of club that hasn't had prior experience at that sort of top level, the journalists and the questions are a lot more probing. They're a lot more kind of there's a finer point to a lot of what they're saying. There's an undercurrent, because you're supposed to do well. You have so much less time. Like, even looking at Nathan Jones, the kind of understanding of it was that, yeah, he had his chance. He didn't prove it. He was manager for 8 games. Yes, it wasn't good. And it was a very kind of negative, again, scenario where he wasn't in becoming endearing himself to the fans. It was very much a me versus them mentality. And you can't really have that when you need everyone together. You need everyone pulling in the same direction to make sure that you're grinding out results and keeping yourself in the league. But in this scenario, I think you've got to look and say, we do live in a world now where you are very, very quickly judged if you are not performing in the remit of getting wins and scoring goals. I mean, like even the ridiculousness of our February Goal of the Month award, there was only one goal scored, so it was our best goal and our worst goal. But you, like I think he's too streetwise to be pulled in as much as Nathan Jones probably was, because it did very much feel like he was trying to stick his chest out and prove that he could mix it with the big dogs. But for Graham Potter, I think he knows if he wasn't going to get to Chelsea, there's plenty of clubs that would pick him up and he would do wonders with. So slightly lower down. I'm not saying he's going to go to another top 6 team at all. But I mean, there's plenty of Premier League teams. Even if the newly promoted teams could come in and pick him up, and he would keep them in the league, they would really start working. There'd be a plan there. So I think there's more about him in terms of his ability. That's clear. I think it's just there's still going to be that chip on his shoulder until the football he wants to play is implemented and showing itself. He will still feel like that he's got more to prove, and that I think he can have a little bit of swagger for himself, because it's not a perfect scenario, and I think a lot of what gets lost as well. We're talking like less than a year ago, Chelsea might not have existed as a club because of the scenario and the situation we were in. To be in this position now, no one wanted and no one would have foreseen. But there's probably a lot that's going on at Cobham, in the ground, all around Chelsea as a whole, that's being changed. I know for a fact that Todd Bowley has even gone to the point of going into the ticket office and to the management team in the ticket office and rearranging the desks, because he didn't want anything from the previous regime staying the same. So if there is no base for any of the players or any of the staff or anyone involved in the club to recognise what they had before, it can be difficult. And I don't think anyone would have done as well as would be expected. I'm not saying there's definitely managers that would have had much better success and would have been able to pull something out of this. I'm pretty sure, especially with the team we can field. Our strongest 11 is ridiculous that it's not competing for the top of the table. But you have to kind of take a lot of it into account of saying this isn't a typical scenario. You have just had new owners come in with a lot of upheaval, and there's pressure as well because of what's expected of the club. And the nature of the club is, if you don't succeed quickly, you are immediately turned on by a lot of people.
I think that's a good point, Luke. I think one of the main issues I have with Potter deflecting is that he shouldn't really be deflecting. He should be focusing on himself. I mean, whilst I understand, like, look, he will obviously want to point the finger at other managers. I mean, for someone who's as versed in psychology, and I think it's sports psychology as himself, I mean, he shouldn't really be looking towards anyone else. He should be just reaffirming himself in the position that, like, look, this is a project. Things will take time. I mean, realistically, when he was announced manager, I wrote Chelsea season off. Like, did I think they hired a talented manager? Absolutely, they did. He's worked wonders with Brighton, but as you said, Brighton are completely different than Chelsea. Chelsea are a top team with a history of success. I mean, multiple Champions Leagues. They've won multiple doubles as well. They've had sustained success fairly recently as well under Antonio Conte, where I think they won a double in its fourth season, and they were runners up in the FA Cup in its following season. But even regards to that, I mean, I think Chelsea fans should obviously be patient, and this is coming from a Manchester United fan, who the vast majority of us have limited to no patience whatsoever. I think next season Chelsea will come good. I think all Graham Potter needs is a sustained period where there's no football, essentially no World Cup, no outside distractions, and to really focus on the signings that he's brought into the club. I mean, like you said, it's a very strange scenario where we've had a club bought out. All previous mentions or notions of the last regime is essentially, like you said about Todd Bowley going in and rearranging even the ticket desks. It's gone. Like, there's no more Roman Abramovich. So with that, I would hope goes the quickness to dismiss managers. I think once Potter does have that, I'd say, pre-season and a bit under his belt, it might work wonders for his cohesiveness as well. A lot of people are forgetting that Chelsea in the background have world-class staff to support their manager. And a lot of Chelsea's current staff are coming from Brighton. So that's obviously a step up in terms for them as well. But again, that's just my thoughts. I think Potter, look, he deserves time. I don't really think that they're involved in a relegation battle. I think some people are some people and pundits are kind of overplaying the seriousness of what's going on. I mean, I think you guys finished 10th the season after, the season Leicester won the Premier League, and I can't remember talks of upheaval back then. So I think support Graham Potter, let him work his magic, and eventually, you will be back on the right track. It is an extremely strong team. It's going to have a lot of focus on it because of the money spent. We all know money doesn't necessarily buy success. Manchester United being a prime example of how we spent in the previous transfer markets, but I'd say Potter has bought smart. These are players that are very good football players. They were bought for a reason. They've all shown glimpses of what they were bought for. So, like I said, it just takes time. That's all it is. It's just going to take time.
Yeah, I suppose maybe Graham Potter's situation isn't necessarily helped by the success that Erik ten Hag's had since he's come in at United. Obviously with that Carabao Cup win on the weekend, that team seems to have bonded a lot better. I know there's not the amount of new signings, but you've had Casemiro, the boys from Ajax. There's still been a fair bit of change at United. Do you think that maybe that success is kind of hurting Graham Potter as well?
I would say yes and no. I mean, Ten Hag brought in proven winners. So Casemiro, I think, has 5 Champions Leagues to his name. Casemiro as a signing in itself. I mean, he is a proven winner. He's got these trophies behind his belt. He played for one of the best teams in the world for an extended period of time. He was surrounded by phenomenal players. So he brought that experience into the changing room. The other signings, like, look, Lisandro Martinez, obviously knew Ten Hag's way, as did Anthony. I mean, when you compare these players to the players that Chelsea have bought, I mean, I can't turn around and say Chelsea have bought, they have a Casemiro in their mix, because they haven't bought someone with that level of experience, because people with that level of experience don't really exist anymore, or they're at the later stage of their career. But I think what Ten Hag has done is he has embedded himself in the club. He's very blunt and abrasive with his communications to the players, as we're all aware. He made them run I think it was 13 kilometres or 13 and a half kilometres after the 4-0 loss to Brentford. And it's things like that will show a manager, and this is just speaking from as a professional career, if you embed yourself within the team, the best manager and the best leaders lead from the front. They lead from example. They lead by example. And I think it's only a matter of time before Graham Potter does that. Like I said previously, it's a messy season for pretty much everyone. I think, look at Liverpool, for example. They've fallen off massively. I think this time last year we were speaking about them winning a quadruple. So, I mean, dips do happen. They're not permanent. I would not say they're permanent at all. I don't think it's fair to compare Ten Hag and Potter as well. Like, look, Potter inherited I would actually argue a worse team, in the sense that, like, look, the players were good. Obviously, the results weren't going their way. The new management didn't really buy into Thomas Tuchel and how he carried himself as a professional. But Ten Hag is ingrained himself in the club. Graham Potter just needs time to do that. That's all there really is to it, I'd say.
I think. Sorry, just to jump off the back of that, I think a slight difference is, yes, I think Erik ten Hag is very clear and very kind of settled in terms of he does know what it takes to be performing at a top level, where winning is the requirement as opposed to the end goal. I know, yes, the Dutch league is not as competitive as the Premier League, but for Ajax, the situation they're in, the whole kind of the rebranding of the club, the bringing of it's Van der Sar, is the technical director, is he there? So it's that whole change there, because they were unsuccessful for a number of years, and Ten Hag has been involved in that process of, right, let's give them a chance. Let's get them competing again. Let's stop PSV and Feyenoord having their chance at the title, and let's regain this Ajax dominance. Let's really re-understand what we want to do as a football club, and work to maintain that at a top level. And I think that's an experience that Potter could have benefited from, maybe going to Europe and playing his trade in a different league, where the expectation is we should be winning trophies, not let's build towards getting to Europe, to build the money, to change the state of the club, to build up young players that we can sell on, to make profit, to keep us profitable as an organization, and then look to go, right, well, let's make a push now for the Europa League, and then let's see if we can sustain that a couple of seasons. I think the massive difference here is you're coming off the back of Tuchel as well. Even in a season where we didn't perform to our best, we get to 2 cup finals last year, and we lose out on penalties twice. And that's against a Liverpool team that was expected to potentially win a quadruple. So you've got to now look at it coming. The start of the season, he doesn't do very well, but he has a lot of credit in the bank. We won the Champions League when we shouldn't have won the Champions League. And that is massively down to his coaching and the little tweaks he made to a team that had more potential than they were probably playing to with the previous management. But with him being there, he came in, he did what he needed to do. He has that European now, so he has that understanding, especially when you come from a club like PSG, of knowing what is required on and off with personalities on the pitch and what's required on the field to have success. He comes in and then is dismissed by the new ownership. Now, this isn't something that necessarily surprised a lot of Chelsea fans because of the nature of a new owner coming in. They want to have their imprint on the club. They did it with their other sporting organisations in the baseball. They got rid of their coach there. They had 3 seasons where he really underperformed, and now they've consistently since 2019 not finished out the top 2 teams. So their model is very much we back the manager or the coach we have in place, and we change the infrastructure around them to give them the best chance to succeed. So I think with Erik ten Hag, he came in and just had an element of understanding his philosophy, his principles. They're tried and tested. He's been on the European stage. He knows that they're working in those sorts of environments. It's very clear now that squad, as much as there was a lot of talk of, are the players good enough for United over the last few years under previous management, it's clear now that Solskjaer stayed in the job probably too long for some of those players there. They were the talk of Bruno Fernandes, whether or not he's good enough, or he has his games where he's amazing and has games where he drops off. Marcus Rashford being completely out of form, not knowing how to even run in a straight line. At some points, it felt like all of this is gone because there's a system in place. It allows the players to flourish. There's no talk now about Bruno Fernandes being inconsistent or not. He does his job and he pops up with the skill and ability he has. You've got players now like Fred is playing so much better than he has before because his instructions are clear. McTominay comes in, the pressure is off him every time now. He's not starting every week because you've got a leader like Casemiro in there. They've recruited well, recruited smartly, but there is still so much there to do. Like the fact that you've gone, what was it, potentially 10 games? I think Luke Shaw was playing centre back for you. But it wasn't a problem because the coaching and the tactical intelligence is there to take the pressure off of the players and say, look, if we play in this system, the fact that you're 5'8" playing at centre back is not going to be exposed. Martinez has done it. Again, it's the personnel. You have to bring in the right type of player. But there's a clear first and then second position or first and second role for everywhere on the pitch. And it comes. We were talking about the Carabao Cup final, but it comes to it. Newcastle changed their system. They go 4-4-2 in the second half. They bring on Isak to partner up Wilson for a bit of creativity. What does Ten Hag do? Okay, fine. We'll take off Weghorst. We'll drop Casemiro so he literally sits in front of the back 4 to completely remove that area of space, and the game's completely shut off. But it's that idea of knowing what it takes to play in these big games where there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of kind of every minute detail is focused on. But then you get all the players knowing their job, so it's kept very simple. It's very straightforward, and the leaders can step up and step to the forefront, and they're ready to achieve. And they, I think, they pretty much walked the final. There was moments Newcastle looked good, and you still have to play well. And I think Man United played very well, but I was never in doubt that they weren't going to win. I feel, and that's a big indictment to how far they've come under Ten Hag, especially after the first few results when he was in. It just showed that there was a lot to change in the club, but he's done the things he needed to in the right way, and there's still a lot more progression to come. So it's an exciting time to be a United fan, but I also look at it and think, if we can just ride this out, and it's difficult because I don't know if we can, but if we can ride this out, there is potential that Chelsea can do the same. Because if you can get everyone buying into what the manager wants to do, if we do that and it still doesn't work, then that's fine. We've given it the best shot we can. We move on. We try again. But I still don't know if we're doing that because of the nature of the club and the regime that's been left from behind from before, where there's players there that know how ruthless that club can be. They're like, we haven't had N'Golo Kante for an extended period of time, and he was so crucial to our team for so long. And even in the Champions League run, he won 4 back-to-back man of the matches because we just kept rattling him cotton wool and let him play in those quarterfinals and semi-final fixtures. And he makes such a difference. When you were talking about Casemiro, it really made a point to me of having him back in the team could make such a difference for us, because I know he's getting on and he's not going to be as good as he once was, but he does the job of 2 men. So that allows the other players to not allows Enzo Fernandez to not worry about, oh, is Loftus-Cheek going to be in position? Can I step forward? Can I play this kind of risky pass because I know someone else is going to help cover for us? There's a few other things that I think you can kind of look into it and say the what he's tried to do with what he has isn't working. I don't necessarily know why we haven't gone back to back three at points, because it's something he did at Brighton and it's something we are used to in terms of the personnel at the club at the moment for Chelsea. We are very resilient now with this 4-3-3 system, and in his first few games he was a lot more tactically flexible and it worked in his favour, whereas now it's a lot more rigid and it's forced in some ways, I'd say, and it's not coming up with results. And I know that Potter is a lot more fluid than he's showing at the moment. So it's very interesting to see that, like with Spurs, we went 1-0 down and I never thought we were going to score. There's a couple of chances, of course, because you're going to have a couple of instances in any game. But the way we were set up, I never felt like we would get back into the game. It was a case of we either score first or we don't get anything from this. So, but yeah, to your point about Ten Hag and to bring it back to the Carabao Cup, as I know you want to talk about next, I think, yeah, you're right. As Robbie's alluded to, it's a difficult situation to compare them, but you have to look at it and go, I think Ten Hag is probably a little bit further on in terms of that higher tier of management and understanding the pressures of what it means to win each week. Whereas let's coach a victory over Liverpool at Anfield, that's really good. Whereas we should be expected to beat every team we play. What does that look like? It's a completely different scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Chelsea's situation and United's one obviously still got a chance of winning 3 more trophies this year. I think it's going to be a very interesting end to the season. But moving on maybe a bit further afield, into Europe, I was thinking, we've all kind of got, second teams that we like to support, egg on, and just like to see do well. But who are they for you? And is there any backstories behind it as to why you started supporting them or like to see them do well, or just clubs that you just really cannot take to?
For myself, there's one club I was thinking about it the other day when you kind of posed the question to us, and it definitely is FC Porto. Not only are they kind of synonymous with the club anyway, because they are the club, the club side that sort of launched the special one of Jose Mourinho with his success in the Champions League way back in 2004. But also, I think it's, for me, they have had quite an intrinsic, an intrinsic relationship with Chelsea. Not only the fact culminating in our second Champions League victory was in their back garden, which last year I actually went to visit. I went on holiday to Porto and I did a stadium tour, and it was really kind of a bit of a goosebumps moment to be around. I'm standing on a field where not less than 12 months ago, my team were winning the Champions League with a goal from Kai Havertz. But I think there's a lot. I've kind of looked fondly on them for a long time because the city is so passionate. I learned a lot of that when I was there as well. That they had a turnout of about 3,000 people for the FC Porto volleyball team. They had a volleyball match against the Sporting Lisbon side, and they were in town, and it was so much energy there. We got a taxi across the city, and the taxi driver was telling us all about the rivalry and there's so much passion and diehard support for the clubs there. And we did a tour of the Superbot Brewery as well, which is a massive sponsorship that Porto have, that also Sporting Lisbon have, because Benfica, they are sponsored by Sagres, which are the two main beer distributors for both club for Portugal. And it's just really, really interesting. And I think, again, synonymous, as I say, the linking with the club and my club and for Porto. I was a massive fan of the Villas-Boas team as well that won the Europa League with Falcao up front. We were linked with Falcao for a long time. And obviously Villas-Boas came to Chelsea as well. So there's a lot of tie-ins over the years that have kept the club kind of in similar interest for me. They've always been a kind of team I've looked out for. And it was nice to kind of reflect, and as I say, to have a full circle moment to visit their stadium, where my own team were kind of had one of their greatest nights. So.
Yeah, Robbie, I mean, who are you kind of leaning towards?
So me, I've two. I'll probably get a giggle out of a couple of people watching this, but Ajax, and no, it's not because Ten Hag, previously Ajax manager. I'm not a hipster like that, but it all started essentially when I went to Amsterdam. I've been to Amsterdam quite a number of times, but I tended to unconsciously coincide my visit to Amsterdam with times when when Ajax are actually playing at home and the city does be, alive. It's buzzing. It's phenomenal. It's a fantastic atmosphere. I think the last time I was over, I went to see. I think it might have been Ajax and Feyenoord at the Amsterdam Arena or the Johan Cruyff Arena, and the city was just electrifying. I was sitting in the bar watching the match, and I was thinking, "Oh my god, this is absolutely, it's out of this world." But it all stemmed from the first ever visit I had to Amsterdam. It just happened to coincide but when they were playing at home, and I seen all the jerseys. I've obviously heard of total football. I've obviously heard of their success in the 70s, the 80s, and when they won the Champions League, and I think it was 95. I just kept thinking to myself, this is great. This is fantastic. Their fans are absolutely hilarious. There was phenomenal costumes going around, or people just overall, really, really happy. And then it eventually got me into watching them. I think we went to a bar at the first night, watched the match. Obviously, the atmosphere was fantastic. I think they pulled out a win. But ever since then, I think I just thought to myself that this is a club I like to watch. They play great football. Another one would actually be Eintracht Frankfurt. And ironically enough, I pulled them out of a draw and work for the winners of the Europa League. I figured, look, I didn't really follow the Bundesliga until then. I obviously picked them out. Decided, look, I'll actually watch a couple of their games. I think it was on Now TV or something like that. They played very well. Obviously, they didn't play as well in the Bundesliga as they did in the Europa League, considering they won the Europa League. But I watched them thinking, like, this is a really, really great, energetic team. I was cheering them on as they won the Europa League. From another standpoint for me, I thought it was great considering, obviously, my Manchester United supporter. 2021-22 wasn't a great season for United. So seeing a secondary team or a second favourite team pull off such an unexpected win. Nobody really expected them to get past. I actually think it was Barcelona, if memory serves me correctly.
Yeah.
They played phenomenally against Barcelona in knockout rounds. And I think once they made it past Barca, I couldn't count them out. I figured, look, they've gotten past the biggest test they could have faced, and there's no stopping them now.
Yeah, I'm Eintracht Frankfurt as well. Started watching him because the Bundesliga was the first league back after COVID and everything. It was just one of those teams that, I really took to. Same with Dortmund, but I think Dortmund is one of those shouts that's kind of so easy to go for, and everyone wants to see Dortmund do well. Anyone but Bayern, I think, is kind of most people's Bundesliga sort of preferences. But yeah, Frankfurt obviously being out there last week for the game against Napoli, even though they lost 2-0, the fans were absolutely buzzing. Do you know what I mean? It's their first Champions League campaign. That Northwest curve did not stop bouncing for 90 minutes. Even at half time, they were going mental. It is one of the best atmospheres I've seen, and it shows, when you've got a club that you don't take success for granted, it's so much better atmosphere-wise than your Bayerns and your Dortmunds, where success just comes to you every year and you think nothing of it, you get used to it. I suppose I would say it's the same at Leicester, but our atmosphere is awful. But when you've got a club that winning is something special, it's not to be expected. I think that just makes the whole storyline of doing well so much better.
Yeah, Frankfurt they are a very kind of they bring the energy for everyone else very much so. I think I remember the Europa League campaign 2019. We played them in the semis. We had to get through on penalties in the end, actually. But I'd been for kind of every home game for that run in, and there was a lot of good fans. I remember, I think it was Sparta Prague. I think it might have been we played the team where Souček and Kufal came from. And they had a really good travelling fan base as well. But Frankfurt were a different level. They did not stop singing all evening. And then when it got round to the penalties, I was very much like, we're shooting where they're standing as well. It was at the bridge, but we are taking the penalties in front of the away support. And they got flares, they got flags. and the Bridge isn't a massive, Stamford Bridge isn't a massive stadium, but they really had the place rocking, and I was very much like, well, we're quite quiet as it is anyway. So the fact that they're just completely dominating it here, and it's the same as you say with the Barcelona match. They bought, what was it, 30,000 home tickets to fill out their stand, so they felt like it was their own stadium, and that's really what I felt when I was there. But thankfully, we got through and obviously won the trophy. But it really kind of left an imprint on my head of thinking, wow, yeah, it really means a lot to them. And I think another team that I'm not necessarily following as much, but I'm really enjoying their story this season is Union Berlin. The fact that they're a club that were on the brink of administration. Well, I think I heard a story, I think it was on TalkSport, where they were saying their fans were donating blood. Because in Germany you get paid for blood donation, and they were using that to put towards the club, which is a really funny thought of like the people literally bleeding for their team. I think there's a lot of passion, and there's a lot of joy to be found in the support of Bundesliga teams, away from, as you say, the typical Bayern Munich and the Dortmunds as well. Dortmund, it's a shame because I think they are a very traditional and likable club, but it's the fact of everyone else already supports them. It's no longer interesting to like Dortmund, but they are a very likable club. Another one for me, I was going to touch on as well, was Bayer Leverkusen. There's been a number of players that have kind of come from that team that have come to Chelsea that made me kind of interested, namely Michael Ballack. Was a massive player for them and was a massive player for us as well. And over the years, there's different players like Andre Schürrle. We've always been linked to kind of some of their players to come to the Premier League and to come to Chelsea. But I was always kind of fascinated with them. They were very much that nearly team, weren't they? Where they had, I think it was 3 cup finals in the space of like 4 weeks. This is back in the late 90s. And they went on to lose all of them when they were favourites for every single final, I think it was. And it was very much again, there's that kind of, there's a heritage for all of these clubs in some way or another, where if you dig a little deeper into the Bundesliga and into the teams that play, you can see a lot of history there, and little tidbits like that. And was it Hamburg that had never been relegated, and they had the clock in the stadium, and then when they got relegated, I think a couple of seasons ago, it was the first time it went, because it counted ever since the club had existed, essentially, and it had like 10,000 days or whatever, or something ludicrous like that. And then they had to reset it to 0 because they'd always been in the Premier Division of German football ever since the club's inception. And it's little things like that. I think there's a lot of culture and heritage within those leagues that I feel like can get lost in the Premier League. Yeah. Particularly when you get this kind of same teams going up and down as well, like your West Broms, your Watfords, and everything is almost like it just becomes about the finance and the monetary side of the Premier League, as opposed to, there's a lot of character in the leagues. Yeah, and the fans, and it's the fans that make it, and it is the organisations, how they market themselves. I think there's obviously so much intrigue in the lower divisions in English football, but in our top division, I do think we've lost a lot of character because we've just become so what's the word? But it's become so franchised. It's become so about the money, the television rights. It is less about the passion of enjoying sport. It is more about what's VAR saying. How do we make this the best product it can be? When really people just want to watch 22 blokes run around in a field kicking a ball. You know.
I think Germany is a perfect case study of why the Super League wouldn't work. Because you would lose out on so many of these little fan stories and the little things like the clock and all these stories with Union Berlin going back to like the fans rebuilding the stadium. You just miss out on all of that. And it's not football at that point. Do you know what I mean? If every league was like the Premier League and like you say, the parachute payments, they just send the same teams back up every year, it would just be so boring to watch. You can guarantee who's going to win each year.
I think the last time I would say was genuinely excited about a Premier League season, obviously this season aside because it's Ten Hag, would have been the season that Leicester won the Premier League. I think it's very hard to argue, a more electrifying campaign in the last, I would say, 20 years than that particular Premier League win. I think when Leicester lifted that Premier League, for me, that was the pinnacle of the Premier League. Anything can happen. I think the odds were 5,000 to 1 at one stage. I think at the start of the season, for them to lift the league, and obviously the conversation came, look, whoever's top at Christmas is going to be top at the end of the league. At the end of May. And I think it's very hard to find stories like that outside of the Premier League as well. I mean, like, look, obviously PSG have their sustained dominance in the French league, but there'll obviously be a couple of heads poking up every now and so often. Monaco and Lille, for example, but it's not really consistent. I mean, whilst the parachute payments, I do think they probably should be stopped because, like you said, it's the same teams coming up and coming down every single season. The one thing I would say is about one of the teams that have come up, which is Fulham. They've been playing fantastically. They've done very well. It's actually nice to see them in the top half of the table. At least at the time of filming this, I believe they're the top half of the table. But it's nice to see that, look, using those payments, they bought well, which is always great to see. But it does kind of dilute the content we get. If someone gets I think it's 100 million if they get promoted to the Premier League, but it's over 5 seasons or 2 seasons, or I'm not really sure overall the finances. But I mean, if you get a team that's getting that money and they're going straight back down to the Championship, they're coming straight back up. I mean, realistically, they've got that money there. They've got that purchasing power. Players will be looking at them thinking, okay, this club is obviously going to go straight back up. They've got a history of it. They're going to repeat the pattern of, they've been relegated. They're going back up. I might be able to agree promotion clauses. If the club gets promoted, my salary increased by a certain amount, or it works off of a bonus in the sense that, look, if we get promoted, I get a lump sum. Players will find that attractive because it's guaranteed. But if there's no guarantee, it becomes a lot more interesting. I mean, for me, seeing Middlesbrough, for example, making a surge back up to the Championship, that's been great to see. And obviously, Michael Carrick is pretty close to me in the sense that, look, he's a United legend. But just to see someone different making their way up the ranks, it's refreshing. And I think that's what we need. I just think we need some sort of refreshment in the sense that it's not the same 2 or 3 or 4 teams competing for second place, first and second. I mean, this season, obviously, with Liverpool falling off the rails a little bit, and Chelsea, it's kind of just left Newcastle to pick up the pieces, which nobody really expected. Now, don't get me wrong, they are a good team. They're playing well under Eddie Howe, but I think they're beginning to be found out as a team. This is how you beat them. But we just need more surprises, I think, in English football. I think the longer it goes and the richer the sport becomes, it's getting very, very top heavy. So it would be nice to see some of that commercial value going down to the lower league teams. So we can get, we can get another Leicester. We can get someone who fought relegation the previous season to come on and win it and be a title contender. Like Union Berlin, I think they were either promoted the season before or they had finished in the lower half of the Bundesliga, and I think they're now sitting second or third. I mean, everybody loves
third, but level on points.
Yeah, everybody loves a story like that, but in the Premier League, it just doesn't happen as much as it should.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be an interesting one, I think, going forward. Obviously the Super League's been floated around again, last month. I think that could definitely shape, the future of football, whether it happens or not. I think a lot of reform is going to come from that and maybe shape the future of English football and European football as a whole.
I think a lot more people seem to be on board with it this time, though. That's what a lot of the murmurings are. I think the difficulty we have, again, is because there's such negative bias from other countries around the world about the Premier League, whereas, as I say, there's not as much character there and there's not as much intrigue because it doesn't feel like a plucky individual can rise up and actually have an effect unless it's a complete shock like the Leicester scenario. But I think for other leagues, they're all looking at it and going, there's too much money there. For some of the top talent in Italy or Germany or France to be going to a club like Bournemouth, who are pretty much nailed on to be relegated, it shows you the level of influence and financial prestige that these clubs can have. And that's why things like the Super League will be backed by other countries, because they want to have a platform where they can have a share of the product. And they've all tried different methods and models of how to make their leagues more palatable. But I think the difficulty you will always have is some of the highest attendances and some of the highest watched matches are games that are played in England. Like you cannot recreate kind of the level of intrigue behind a Manchester derby or a Man United versus Liverpool or a North London derby or even to not even look at the Premier League. I mean, like looking in the Scottish League with Celtic and Rangers is a rivalry that's known around the world. But in the British Isles, I just think sport like that as a product is always a lot more marketable because there's a level of intrigue. There's a level of the rivalries are a lot more intense in a lot of ways. There's a lot more kind of malice in terms of the history of the football as well, and a lot of underdog spirit. A lot of teams can feel like that they can, while they may not can have continued success, they can cause individual shocks, and there's competitive nature to the league. That is starting to potentially become worn away as we look over a period of time where if Man United ends up with Qatari owners, there's talk of Liverpool getting Qatari owners. There's going to be as much as these parachute payments are there. I think if more money comes from the top teams, there's going to be more pressure on them from the FA and the Premier League as well to contribute to the finances for other teams, and it's just going to keep building everyone's money and their pool up. And if the other clubs don't do other clubs abroad, don't do something to have an influence, like creating a Super League, they're not going to get a slice of the pie.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Maybe have like a more in-depth discussion about for next week. But I think for this week, we'll wrap it up. Come back next week for episode 6, where we'll talk about the European Super League and some of this week's biggest fixtures. And any more crazy stories in football, because there's definitely plenty around at the moment.